The Hot Seat.
Welcome to The Hot Seat, a debate segment where ideas clash and insights spark. I'm your host, Hongbin Jeong. Now, in a meritocratic society like Singapore, transparency should be a step in the right direction in terms of fairness. However, Singaporean culture often values discretion and harmony. Even though it's not illegal to share your salary, many still see it as taboo or risky in professional settings. So what happens when we aim to push for openness in a system built on personal performance, quiet ambition, and competitive advantage? Would it spark resentment, conflict, or even drive talent away? Should employers bear the responsibility of disclosing the salary range of all roles in their organization, as well as how that salary range was derived? That is why today we'll be debating the idea of making the concept of wage transparency common in Singapore. Now, before we hear from our guests and dive deeper into this debate, here's a disclaimer. The views and arguments presented by our interviewees do not necessarily reflect their personal beliefs or opinions. Instead, they're here to provide a fresh perspective on the topic at hand. On that note, if you'd like to send some questions in for our guests or to share your opinions, feel free to WhatsApp us at 88550893. That's 88550893. Or leave a comment on our Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, as we're currently streaming live on those platforms as well. And without further ado, to introduce our guests for tonight, joining us today is Fermin Diaz, who is the adjunct professor at SMU and co-author of 3 books, Human Capital and Global Business Strategy, the Remuneration Handbook International Edition, and Fundamentals of HR Analytics, to share with us why wage transparency should be the norm. We also have Adrian Choo, CEO and founder of Career Agility, who will try to convince us otherwise. Welcome to the hot seat, both.
Hello, how are you today?
Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me today. All right, just to kickstart of our debate here, to what extent is wage transparency still a taboo here in Singapore? And is it time to challenge that norm? Fermin, maybe we should start with you.
I think it's very much a taboo. I think a lot of HR folks in companies still believe that pay is confidential. In fact, many contracts that people sign when they join companies will specifically say that pay is confidential and that they're bound by that rule of confidentiality. However, I think there are many advantages to disclosing pay. And if I may, I want to just sort of set the ideas straight of what transparency actually means. And there's 3 different levels of transparency. First level would be, do people understand how pay is derived? Where does it come from? There are salary grades, and where am I positioned in that salary grade, and how that decision is made. That's the first level of transparency. And in fact, many companies don't even abide by that sort of low bar of transparency of explaining to people what that is. The second level of transparency is to tell people your specific job is paid this much within this range, and the way that we will decide how much you personally are paid is this way, and they can compare if what they're paid aligns with that. That would be a second level of transparency. That would be ideal. The third level of transparency is the level where everybody knows what everybody else makes. I just want to be clear that when we talk about transparency, we are talking about it in 3 different levels.
Right. Well, Adrian, what are your thoughts? I mean, is it still taboo here in Singapore? Is it time to challenge that norm?
Well, I think there is a certain degree of transparency already, especially for most multinational companies. They do have salary bandings where you can roughly know if an individual's in like job group A or B, you know roughly how much the person is, albeit it could be a very broad banding. So I think there's already a certain degree of transparency. But the big question is this: do you really want transparency? Because as Jack Nicholson said in a movie, right, you want the truth, but can you handle the truth? So is that what we really want?
Right. I mean, sometimes ignorance is bliss. So let's dive into some of the questions here. Fermin, starting with you here. Does knowing how much someone earns actually lead to better workplace fairness? Won't companies risk, internal issues like pay envy or even conflict among employees?
We want to build trust between employees and the company. And one of the ways that you want to build trust is by letting people know that they are being treated fairly. If we keep compensation in the dark, you have to believe that you're being treated fairly rather than know that you're being treated fairly. Trust then becomes elusive because you have to rely on the good faith of the company and the goodwill of the company rather than thinking, no, the company is just trying to pay me as little as possible. And the reason they don't tell me how much I'm being paid or how I'm being paid or how others compare to me is because they're paying me as little as possible and they just don't want me to know. It's a very hard way to build trust if you do it that way.
That makes sense. Well, using the concept of wage transparency, then, Adrian, wouldn't it be more accurate to say that keeping the pay scale a secret is more for the benefit of employers at the expense of workers who are underpaid or unaware?
Well, I don't quite agree that it's beneficial only to the employer, because if you were to practice full disclosure on everyone's salary, I think there will be turmoil and mayhem across the board, and I don't think anyone's going to be happy after that. Imagine, I don't think if I found out that Johnny, my colleague, was earning $500 more than me, would I be happy because I think he's doing the same job as me? Or if I'm earning $500 more than Mary, would that make me happy, or would that make me more productive? It wouldn't be. And the irony is, if I found out that my entire team was earning the same amount of money, I'll still be unhappy because, hey, I work harder than Joseph over there. Why am I? So I think there's no end to it, and therefore, wage transparency is opening up a whole can of worms that you can never put back in again.
Well, I mean, in a multinational economy like Singapore's as well, wouldn't wage transparency policies be difficult to enforce consistently across different industries, including those with a high foreign talent inflow and also varying international pay standards?
No, it actually isn't. If this has been done already in places like America and Europe, there's no reason why in a smaller economy like Singapore it couldn't be done. Let me be clear about this. Let's say that you are working in a company and your colleague Johnny, as he says, is right alongside with you. But you happen to be female and Johnny is male. Now, are we discriminating? Wouldn't it be good for everybody to know that we're not discriminating? I think these are important things to know. The general idea that by hiding pay, we are hiding the problem is equivalent to just sweeping the dust under the rug to pretend that there is no dust. I don't think that's a good way to approach it. There are, in fact, advantages to companies of doing transparency. One is this whole issue of building trust. The second is to ensure that there's pay equity among all the various, male, female, part-time, full-time, older, younger. You can pick your demographic. We can ensure then that. Third, and this is to me the most important part, if we are transparent, it will force the Human Resources Department to ensure that pay is actually fair. Whereas if we keep it hidden, as we do today, then all of the problems are also hidden, and we do not necessarily have the incentive to clean up pay. There are more advantages. I'll tell you one more. We actually did do pay transparency in the National Council of Social Service, where if any of the listeners wants to test this, just please type NCSS salary guidelines on whatever browser you use. Within one click, you will see the exact way in which the social services sector in Singapore pays all of the different jobs that are in the sector. Not only employees can check, but employers can check, and prospective employers can check whether they are paid fairly or not. The advantage was that when we did this, not only did pay get substantially fixed within the sector, but the amount of people applying for jobs in the sector went up by 600%, and the retention of employees within the sector went down by 4 percentage points. So HR benefited, employees benefited, employers benefited, there was compliance, no problems.
But I would say that those numbers are more of benchmarks, I would say. So employers are at will to plus minus on that amount. And the plus minus could be quite great depending on the particular individual's skill and the demand for that particular skill at the point in time as well. So it's great that the benchmarks are there, but ultimately they're still benchmarks as opposed to having individual salaries revealed to the whole organization. So It's a bit different.
Interesting takes on both ends here. Well, just a few weeks ago, the Ministry of Manpower reported that Singapore's real wages rose at a faster rate at 3.2% in 2024, with more firms giving salary bumps. Additionally, the proportion of firms that gave wage increases to their staff rose in 2024, even though the proportion of profitable businesses declined slightly from the year before. So in line with what was reported, Adrian, shouldn't we empower employees to negotiate fairer wages by introducing an open policy with regards to salary disclosures? How will we know how much to negotiate if we're not aware of the pay standards?
And I think a lot of people out there are already aware of their pay standards in the market because of benchmarks like what Fermin mentioned, but also getting benchmark information from headhunters, or if you've gone for job interviews externally, you should know your value in the market. So I think it is everyone's responsibility to go out and find, like earlier we were talking about going on Glassdoor as well, there's some salary details there. But I think we should know not just, and I don't think we should benchmark our salary based on market data, but on the contribution you bring to the organization. Because so what if the sales salary benchmark is $6,000 in the market, but hey, I'm bringing in $2 million worth of business. Does that mean I should be benchmarked at $6,000? So it's all relative, and I think it's more important for our listeners out there who are wondering, am I being fairly paid? Is to understand your contribution, and if you're really creating that much value, I think you should be assertive to ask for more money, regardless of market data.
Right. Well, I was doing some research on why, wage transparency isn't a norm. And one of the reasons why companies generally don't disclose pay ranges to employees is because of competitive knowledge. So if competitors know your salary figures, they can easily push their management to offer higher pay, potentially triggering an unsustainable wage spiral in the market. Fermin, I see you shaking your head here, but if wage transparency becomes a norm and it triggers somewhat of a wage war, how do you prevent that from destabilizing Singapore's labor market, especially for SMEs that can't afford to keep up?
Anybody that wants to know how much to get paid, all they have to do is Google it. They will find out through Glassdoor. They can go into any job portal. They can go into LinkedIn. It is very easy to figure out how much a job should be paid. Now, whether that is what the company pays, that's different. Even university graduates, every single year, there is an article that gets published right around the time everybody's looking for jobs that will say that SMU, NU, NUS, NTU graduates are now commanding $4,200 to $4,500 of starting salary. None of this is new. All of this is competitive knowledge, quote unquote, that is out in the open. So the fact that I'm going to lose competitive advantage? No, forget it. That is not true, because anybody can know pretty much what that wage level is going to be. What I think is important in this discussion is not whether we lose competitive advantage in that sense, is whether the company and the employer can establish a good relationship. Because the whole issue of transparency is not whether the industry numbers are known, is whether I, as an employee, feel that I am being paid fairly by you, the company. That is really the crux of this argument. So no, I don't buy this notion that oh my God, people are going to know how much we paid, because the same HR team that is saying this at the same time then will go and publish in public job portals how much are they paying.
Very true. Well, Adrian, on the flip side then, how is it ethical to protect companies from a so-called wage war while keeping employees in the dark about their own market value?
Well, I think there's already a wage war going on right now in the market, especially for the good talents. Companies are willing to pay premiums over what's a market norm if the person's a high performer or if he has a particular skill set that's needed by the organization. So I think there's already a wage war going on. Some might say a bit too aggressive, that Singaporeans are being priced out of the market sometimes as compared to the region. So I think there's a wage war going on. So transparency will probably not add on to the current wage war, but it might add fuel to the fire a little bit. But I think we should all be aware of how much we are bringing to the organization.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I see the pros and cons of, wage transparency here. I mean, pay transparency could be a double-edged sword as well as it may give rise to discontent among workers. Some experts say when pay differentials become public information, it could create perceptions of unfairness among colleagues, leading to resentment, reduced engagement, and a breakdown in collaboration. Fermin, how would you respond to this? I mean, couldn't wage transparency increase anxiety, especially among younger or even lower paid employees?
Right now, we have all those same senses of unfairness. I don't know how much I'm being paid. Is this fair? I don't think my increase was good. I'm going to quit because I'm now going to get another 10% somewhere else. All of what you just described is the current situation. Transparency helps ameliorate these things by ensuring that you now know how much you're being paid and why, and whether that is fair or not. And hopefully, by having it out in the open, the HR departments will fix any inconsistencies to solve for all of these issues that you're talking about. Because right now, what's happening, because pay is opaque, then people believe that they're not being treated fairly.
Right.
Because there is always somebody that they heard about that is paid more. And
I mean, it creates this assumption that you're
Yes.
not being paid enough, and you just go down to a spiral. But if you knew how much you're exactly being paid compared to others, I guess that will also
at least compared to standards.
Yeah, standards.
Then you would feel that, okay, it's fair, then I don't have to keep looking outside, or now I know what I need to do to improve my pay. Yes.
Right, definitely. Well, it looks like social media is already encouraging the salary conversation here. In one example highlighted by the Straits Times, Karishma Joshani earns more than $300,000 annually working in tech sales. Now, she talks about this openly on social media because she wanted to empower women by raising awareness about the high earning potential in tech sales, a field that remains largely male-dominated and often overlooked. So, Adrian, with cases like this, right, couldn't pay transparency help eliminate, pay discrimination, especially in male-dominated fields like tech sales, where many are unaware of the true earning potential?
So two things. One is I think it's important to have transparency on the mechanisms in terms of what's your base, what's your commission structure, and everything. That's really good. On the other hand, everything is relative because, to be very honest with you, and I've covered the tech sector before, 300,000 for a regional sales person is under the market.
Okay.
A good person earns far more than that. So everything's relative. Some people might go, wow, you're paid so much. Other people will go, oh, that's underperforming. So, but the thing I do like about sales is that, as much as some people might say that there's a gender bias, I think a lot of times the female salespeople do earn a lot more because they are better at it sometimes. Sometimes they have better networks. So I think pegging it down to gender or to other demographics is a bit unfair. And that's why releasing the information will lead to far more unfair attribution to demographics. And once again, opening up a whole can of worms.
I mean, Fermin did mention that once you do open that can of worms, it might lead to more solutions to fix that problem. So how would you respond to that?
And that's why we don't open the can of worms in the first place. But, I am for salary structure transparency. Okay, I am for absolute transparency for starting salaries for graduates, because I think that is something which everyone starts on the same footing. Because if you have two individuals, say a 35-year-old and a 40-year-old applying for the same job, they bring different things to the table. And how can you talk about equity in pay, because they're going to contribute differently? And I think if you are having hourly rated jobs, I think that requires very fair bit of transparency as well. So there are certain areas and certain circumstances where it's important to have transparency. But apart from that, especially if you're talking about opening up individual salaries to everyone else, it can get quite contentious all around. And I wouldn't dare to recommend that.
Can it get contentious, Fermin?
To be fair, disclosing pay from the company's point of view will fly in the face of current law. PDPA will prevent the company from actually doing that unless the employee actually agrees to have their actual pay disclosed. So even if I believed it was the right thing to do, and I have seen it done in other countries, it would be not doable on an individual pay basis here in Singapore due to the current privacy laws. Where I have seen it done is two different sales organizations. No, actually, one was a coding organization in Vietnam. The other one was a sales organization in India, where they disclose the amount of incentive earned by each of the employees in public. They actually put it in a place where everybody could see it. And what was interesting about doing that is that it made everybody perfectly aware of the fact that the amount of commission incentive that they were earning and the linkage to their own production was perfectly clear. There was no hesitation about this is how much I did, and therefore this is how much I earned compared to everybody else. That, what it created is healthy competition. For me to be able to earn what you made, then I need to do that much.
Right.
It made it very, very clear. So that, I think, is helpful. But like I said, right now, PDPA would prevent us from doing that.
All right. Well, just to wrap up our conversation here, ultimately, is wage transparency necessary in order to improve workplace culture? Will there be any unexpected repercussions as a result of introducing an honest approach to salaries? Adrian, you want to go first?
Well, I think, as I said earlier, you can't please everyone all the time. And the HR repercussions in terms of damage or fixing the damage caused by, because when it comes to salary, it's not about the money, it's all about emotions. What's fair, what's unfair. And I've not met a person who's actually told me I'm fairly remunerated. Everyone feels they're underpaid, So if individual salaries or even bandings, individual salaries, I'm okay with bandings, but individual salaries are revealed, besides the PDPA restriction, I think that's going to be difficult. So I think the way to work around it is be transparent about pay mechanisms, be transparent about pay banding, salary banding brackets, and I think there's a certain degree of respect which you have to give to the employee with regards to how much is paid and how much is paid and how he's being paid. So I think we have to adopt a very balanced approach to it.
Right. Fermin, any last thoughts?
As we said earlier, the biggest problem is people believing that they are unfairly paid, and HR doesn't help itself by not disclosing, because that belief remains. You can go out there all day long and say, oh, no, we do this and we do that, but people don't want to believe it until they see it. So I am actually very much on the camp that you have to show them to earn their trust. You cannot just tell them to earn their trust. Now, that being said, the truth is that it can fix lots of problems. One of the problems that I think is easy to fix is, for instance, gender pay discrimination. Many studies by NUS have pointed to the fact that there is still gender pay discrimination here in Singapore. If you have more clarity around how pay is being done, you should be able to ameliorate that. For instance, one of the things that gender pay, according to the NUS study, is caused by is the fact that we ask women, we ask everybody, how much did you get paid? And then do a salary increase in terms of that. That actually perpetuates this gender pay difference. One of the nice ideas, for instance, about having the kind of transparency that Adrian is talking about in how the pay mechanism is that I can now tell you, your job gets paid between, let's say, $5,000 and $7,000. Because of your experience, we think that you should be paid $6,000. Regardless of how much you were making before. Now, if I can make offers with the exact same sort of characteristics to anybody that walks in, regardless of their age or regardless of their gender or regardless of anything else, then you start fixing some of these problems that we currently have. Right. So I am a big believer that transparency, at least transparency in how much you are paid against the mechanism by which pay is decided, should be part of and parcel of all HR departments.
All right. Some great insights from you both. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Our pleasure.
Pleasure as always.
We've been speaking to Furman Diaz, who's an adjunct professor at SMU and co-author of 3 books, as well as Adrian Choo, who is the CEO and founder of Career Agility. Thank you both, and thank you to all those who tuned in to our social media platforms as well as on air. Tune in again next week for another Hot Seat. I've been your host, Hongbin Jeong.
This is Money FM 89.3.